Welcome to Volume 2 in our Southern Steam Finale series, covering all major events in the last 18 months of steam traction on the southern region. Our Volume 1 covered the first 2 months of 1966, and we continue our story into April 1966 in this volume. Bullied Pacifics numbered 70 at the beginning of the year. Only 4 more had gone by March. More than half the motive power on the region were standard types of 5 classes, surprisingly increased to 6 in the period under review by the arrival of 77014 from the Midland region. She, with other standard classes, were to replace the U and N Mansell classes at Guildford, about to be withdrawn. It was farewell also to the Charlies, Q1060s, built in the austerity years of the war, the most powerful tender 060s to run in Britain. Looking just as austere were the USA-built 060 dock tanks. Shedded nominally at Eastleigh, they worked Southampton docks and were great favourites for rail tours, often in pairs. Rail tour duty brought A4 Pacific Kingfisher to the Southern from Aberdeen Ferry Hill. We devote 10 minutes to its travels over 2 days in March 1966. The Giesel ejector-fitted Light Pacific 34064 Fighter Command survived into 1966, as did 34101 Heartland, now preserved, which opens our programme passing Lyndhurst Road, with the first Merchant Navy to be withdrawn in 1966, 35011 General Steam Navigation, heading for Bournemouth. The first unrebuilt Light Pacific to be withdrawn in 1966 was 34041 Wilton. She is seen at Basingstoke on a down Salisbury train. In March 1966, Waterloo was the only terminus in London to witness steam-hauled express trains, Marylebone only having semi-fasts. The last built Merchant Navy, 35030 Elder Dempster lines, backs in for a Bournemouth Express. Standard Class 3 tanks were active on pilot duties, and 34108 Wincanton is away on another Bournemouth-bound train. The Waterloo pilots were stabled in 2 bays at the top of the cab road adjacent to number 11 platform. 82019 would survive to the end of Southern Steam in 1967, but 82023 and 82026 would bow out in the autumn of 1966. The premier train of the line was still entrusted to steam, the Bournemouth Belle, rostered for a Merchant Navy Pacific. Elder Dempster Lines departs with the full Pullman set. The end brake vehicles would be scrapped during 1966. By Clapham Junction, expresses were getting into their stride, but were restricted to 40 miles per hour through the curved platforms of the South Western Main Line. As mentioned earlier, 34064 Fighter Command would be withdrawn in 1966, in fact in May. She had been fitted with a Giesel ejector in May 1962. In this late 1965 view, she still has nameplates. After a period in store at Basingstoke, she was cut up at berths of Bridgend. 50 light Pacifics were never rebuilt. 13 survived in March 1966, but there were 40 rebuilt examples. 34018 Axminster, here passing West Byfleet, would serve to the end of steam in July 1967. Basingstoke was still semaphore signalled in early 1966. Re-signalling here would not be completed until November. Merchant Navy Orient Line departs for Waterloo. Up to September 1966, LMS Black 5s could be found on the Southern, working from Banbury on north to south expresses. This example leaves its train at Basingstoke, but more often than not would work right through to the coast. An up Poole to York train arrives behind 34044 Woolacombe. At the east end of the station, she continues to Reading and Oxford on the western region, over the line opened in 1848 by the GWR, the London and Southampton having arrived at Basingstoke in 1839. Further west, the Lymington branch from Brockenhurst still had a Eurosteam traction to go in March 1966, but Standard Class 4 80,032 would not see the end, being withdrawn in January 1967. Less well photographed was the Hamworthy Goods branch. The station here was originally called Poole, opened off the Southampton and Dorchester line in 1847. By the 1870s, when Bournemouth was at last served by rail and a new station opened in Poole proper, traffic on the branch declined and passenger traffic ceased in 1896. 76026 of Bournemouth Shed carries the head code for Bournemouth to Dorchester goods trains, more usually associated with Waterloo to West of England traffic. This was also the location for industrial steam. Bonnie Prince Charlie, a Robert Stevenson and Hawthorne 040 of 1949, could be found at work here before transfer to Corals Coal's other wharf at Southampton. There she was spare to ex-LSWR B4 dock tank 30,096, now named Coral Queen. Built in 1893 at Nine Elms Works, she was named Normandy, being attached to the Docks and Marine Department. Withdrawn in 1963, she worked at Southampton shunting coal to Northam Gas Works until 1973, when bought for preservation. Facing extinction in the spring of 1966 were the last survivors of Mansell's N&U class. 31803 shunts at Woking and would be withdrawn in March. 31803 had started life as 803 River Itchen, a K-class 264 tank built at Brighton in 1926. Due to sister engine, a number 800 River Cray derailing its speed near Sevenoaks in 1927, it was decided to rebuild the entire class as U-class moguls. Before this, to confirm or deny their riding characteristics, 803 was run on the LNER East Coast Main Line between Huntingdon and St Neots under a certain Mr. H.N. Gresley's superintendency. As early as 1929, 31803 was a Guildford engine, and here she ended her 40-year long life. Also shedded at Guildford was USA Tank 30,072, transferred here from Southampton docks in 1963. She replaced another former dock tank, B4 class 30,089, as it was essential a short wheelbase engine was obtained for moving dead engines in the roundhouse, with restricted space available. Nevertheless, over 250,000 miles was on her record card when withdrawn in 1967. March the 17th saw Standard Class 3 Mogul 77014 arrive on the Southern from Northwich. This unusual transfer delighted enthusiasts and was used on 5 rail tours in the ensuing months of Southern steam. The LCGB ran the New Forester Rail Tour on March the 19th, starting from Eastleigh. Participants took a look at the shed, where Q1 33020 was en route to South Wales for scrapping, and M7 30053, destined for Steamtown, USA, stood amongst bullied Pacifics. Normal service trains ran by with standard class power, including Class 5 73171, the ultimate member of the class, which had been on the Southern since 1963, after transfer from the northeastern region. The weather was dull as 33006 came off shed. 34021 departed the station, and Mansell Mogul 31639 left on the 11:46 empty coaching stock train to Southampton terminus. (33,006) took the tour tender first to Gosport via Fareham. The weather was improving, and interest from the line side was apparent on through Fort Brockhurst, on a line which lost its passenger traffic in 1953. At Gosport, tour participants could admire Sir William Tight's classical station buildings beneath the unglazed remains of the overall roof. Alternatively, the Q1 came in for much attention. Although withdrawn in January 1966, it had been kept for rail tour use in the spring, and had been well turned out with white buffers and smokebox hinges, and even coupling rods. The tour now returned to Fareham and diverged to Southampton via Netley. The line from St Denis had been open 100 years and 2 weeks before this tour. Quite a good way to mark its centenary. Speeds reached the mid-40s. While the tour visited Gosport, USA Tanks 30,064 and 30,073 were coming off shed at Eastleigh to take over from the Q1 at Southampton terminus. 31639 returned from there off its earlier train and is seen passing the 2 USA Tanks. Also en route to Southampton, but this time the docks, is an unrebuilt Pacific. The two USA tanks head off for Southampton terminus, another of Sir William Tyke's creations, arriving ahead of the tour train. They backed on, and unusually for a tour train, departed 5 minutes early. Photographer John Marsh was waiting at Millbrook for the tour train and was rewarded by 34104 Bear Alston passing on the Bournemouth Bell. The new Forester now made its way along the Fawley branch, diverging from the main line just west of Tottenham. The branch is 9 miles long and in places affords views of Southampton water with its ocean-going liners like the Queen Elizabeth. The approach to Fawley is dominated by sidings for the oil refinery, grown to enormous proportions since the Second World War. The SO block trains to Bromford Bridge with 9F haulage in the early 1960s originated here. The line had opened in 1925 by the Southern Railway. Passenger services along the branch had only finished a month before, on the 14th of February. The two USA tanks were both in malachite green livery, applied in 30,064's case in 1964 and for 30,073 in 1963. This livery was usually reserved for the USA's when in departmental service, like at Ashford and Lansing, but as they regularly worked at Eastleigh Works, they also had the repaint treatment. After a run round at the terminus, the tour left for Tottenham. there were two intermediate stations on the branch, at Hythe and Marchwood. 30,073 leading would be withdrawn from service at the end of the year. 30,064 still survives in preservation on the Bluebell Railway. While the tour was on the Fawley branch, 33,006 had arrived at Totton. On arrival of the tour there, the Q1 reversed to take the train on to Lymington. $80,085 preceded the tour train on a down stopper. From Totton, the Q1 carried headcode discs for the main line. When seen at Lymington Junction, these had been changed for the Lymington branch code from Brockenhurst of one white disc in the centre of the buffer beam. For the tour to run down the Lymington branch, it had been necessary to cancel the regular passenger service at this time, and hence the tour actually became the 1700 Brockenhurst to Lymington Pier. At Lymington Pier, the Isle of Wight ferry Farringford arrived with passengers for the 1730 service, which in fact was the tour train as far as Brockenhurst. The low evening sun was in direct contrast to the beginning of the tour some 5 hours earlier. Summing it all up, this was a tour visiting two of the oldest stations in Hampshire, marked the centenary of a line, the closing of a passenger service on a branch, and the penultimate chance of riding behind a Q1 on Southern Metals. The next day, the 20th of March, the RCTS was in the area with their Solent rail tour. Mansell Mogul 31639 was utilised to Gosport, seen here near Fort Brockhurst, and the same pair of USA tanks on the Fawley branch again, but this time coupled bunker to bunker. We rejoin the southwestern main line with photographer John Marsh pacing a standard Class 4 tank near Eastleigh. .73083 has lost its Pendragon nameplates and heads a fully fitted van train for Southampton docks. 80,065 was about to face its last summer of service. Throughout the 1950s, she had seen better times working off Watford Shed. Bullied Pacific Clovelly heads for Weymouth in March 1966, while we stop off at New Milton in the New Forest. .34071 601 Squadron races through for Bournemouth and Weymouth, before standard Class 4 75069, now of Severn Valley fame, also heads west. The small goods yard on the south side would close at the end of 1966, while the signal box would survive until re-signalling in February 1967. .73117 Vivian, as once was, heads the morning Poole to York train, before Merchant Navy Blue Star, another engine into its last summer before eventual preservation, takes us further west to Bournemouth. At 108 miles from Waterloo, we reach Bournemouth Central. The shed here was on the north side of the station, with good viewing facilities from the 1,760-foot-long down platform. Battle of Britain Pacific 34090 would survive in service until July 1967. Her beautiful nameplates, however, would be removed long before this. As built in 1949, she was to have been named 601 Squadron, but when the decision was made to name the engine after the wartime general manager of the Southern Railway, Sir Eustace Missenden, 601 Squadron was affixed to 34071 in August 1948. She awaits duty for a Waterloo-bound train at the east end of the station. .35012 United States Lines runs light to Branksome carriage sidings as West Country Bear Alston arrives on an up Weymouth train. Bournemouth Central was opened in 1885, then called Bournemouth East. The change to Central occurred in 1899. The down platform had been lengthened in 1930 to accommodate two trains. The crossover seen here allowed the working of trains like the Bournemouth Bell to exit Central for Bournemouth West, overtaking another down train for Weymouth. Although not strictly within our story of the last 18 months of steam on the Southern, we feel it right to mention Bournemouth West, which closed in October 1965. It had opened from Poole in 1874, 11 years earlier than Central. 34089-602 Squadron was destined to be the last steam locomotive to have classified repairs at Eastleigh Works in October 1966. We head back towards Waterloo, around the east side of the Branksome Triangle, on the route joining Bournemouth West to Central, opened in 1888. .35022, Holland America Line, races through Rains Park, and arrival at Waterloo allows a view of Orient Line departing. Holland America Line follows the departure of 35,008. On March the 26th, 1966, Waterloo was to witness a completely different Pacific under its roof. The A4 Locomotive Preservation Society had arranged to have 60,024 Kingfisher brought down from Aberdeen Ferry Hill Shed to work a rail tour to Weymouth. Like the previous week's New Forester rail tour, the sun never came out until the afternoon, but the rain did not dampen enthusiast spirits in their attempts to capture this rare event. Kingfisher, chime whistle blowing, races towards Clapham Junction and on past Pirbright. A visit to Eastleigh Shed was on the itinerary, and 60,024 would be serviced there during the layover. Unrebuilt West Country Linton was on shed, with just 3 months' life left. Kingfisher had 6. Photographers like Frank Wakelam waited by the shed for the A4's departure and were first rewarded by 73083 passing on a van train for Southampton docks. Similarly, near Eastleigh Airport, John Marsh first saw Clovelly heading for Weymouth before the A4 passed by. train, tour participants pass Southampton docks and a view of Departmental USA DS233 by its shed in Redbridge Sleeper Depot, a straight-through shed now after the errant USA had demolished the far end when failing to stop quick enough. Arrival at Weymouth, and still raining. Kingfisher backs out of the Down Bay platform, while Clovelly, seen earlier near Southampton, also goes to shed for servicing. While on shed, it was noted that 35022 was in need of some repair to its bogie wheels since we last saw her at Waterloo. It could only be a light repair. She was withdrawn within weeks, in May 1966. 60,024 would get another good supply of coal here from Weymouth's XGWR coaling stage. The coal size would be larger from the tubs than that supplied at Nine Elms coaling plant. Photographer Bob Todd filmed Kingfisher off shed towards Alexandra Bridge. I filmed from the bridge where Bob left off, thereby giving this continuous view of the first ever visit of an A4 to Weymouth. The tour now continued up the XGWR route via Dorchester to Yeovil Pen Mill, and the sun was shining at last. At Pen Mill, Kingfisher ran round its train to achieve a reversal up to Yeovil Junction on the Southern's West of England main line. The 60,024 was built as LNER 4483 in 1936, in fact the 6th A4 in the class, and the second in the batch named after birds. Successive renumberings eventually found it as 60,024. The homeward run from Yeovil was via Salisbury for a water stop, Basingstoke and Waterloo. The LCGB, hearing of Kingfisher's journey south, hurriedly arranged a tour for themselves the next day, the 27th of March, and in bright sunshine, 60,024 left Waterloo for Exeter, eclipsing the last steam to Exeter trip on the 8th of January. In fact, there would be 4 more runs to Exeter in 1966. Water was taken and coal brought forward at Salisbury before passing Wilton, where the Devon Bell used to change engines. Arrival at Exeter was at St David's Station on the XGWR main line. The A4 returned up the bank to Central and servicing on Exmouth Junction shed. Although the weather was still fine, there was a near gale blowing as Kingfisher had its fire cleaned thoroughly and a new fire built up. This was the last steam engine to use 72A's turntable before it was taken out of use. Further runs to Exeter would entail using the Western Region's main line to or from Westbury to regain Salisbury. Kingfisher returned to Exeter St David's to begin its 172-mile return to Waterloo. Richard Elliott was on hand to record the climb at 1 in 37 into Central and again passing St James Park Halt. A week later, on the 3rd of April, 82026 brings in the empty stock for the LCGB Wilson Hants Tour. Motive power was Mansell Mogul's U-Class 31639 and N-Class 31411 of Guildford Shed. 31411 was built at Ashford in 1933 and by now was the last N-Class in regular service, though 31408 was the last officially withdrawn member of the class. 31639 was 2 years older, built in 1931, also at Ashford Works. Bullied Pacifics 34071 and 34015 were also in attendance at Waterloo on this morning. The route of the tour was through the Windsor lines at Clapham Junction and returned via Barnes. In South London, the train is seen heading for Red Hill on the South Eastern and Chatham line through Coulsdon. Leaving Red Hill, the South Eastern route via Reigate to Guildford was taken. During a stop at Guildford for water, various standard Class 5s are noted, soon to have charge of all Mansell Mogul duties out of this shed. The route was now north to Reading via Ash and Farnborough. The pair of moguls are going well on the XGWR line from Reading to Basingstoke via Mortimer. At Basingstoke, the head code changes to the Salisbury route. Salisbury Shed was about to witness the last Mansell mogul to be turned and serviced there. The shed was no stranger to these locos, for they were regularly seen working to Yeovil, Eastleigh and Basingstoke in previous years. 31639 would be cut up at Cashmore's of Newport in September. Salisbury was also to see its last Q1. 33,006 was used on the last leg of the tour to Waterloo, piloted by 31639. It still retained its white embellishments of 2 weeks before on the new Forester Rail Tour. The distinctive southern head code was now Salisbury to Southampton via Redbridge. The train is seen either side of Romsey. Another glimpse of DS233, the erstwhile 30,061 at Redbridge, through Southampton Central and Northern Curve to Eastleigh. The head code had now changed for the Mid-Hants line via Alton to Waterloo. With flashing rods, the tour reached 64 miles per hour at Hersham later. The last Southern Q1 went into the history books. Staying at Eastleigh, standard class 4 tank 80,083 passes 73022 on its way into the shed. At the beginning of 1966, it had nearly 80 engines allocated. By the end of the year, it only had work for 9. 76010 was stored here for 3 months at the end of the year, here working a 9 Elms to Southampton docks freight in the summer. Much of the work Eastleigh Shed was responsible for. Overtaking the freight on the down fast is Elder Dempster lines, heading for Weymouth. As the year progressed, more steam turns went over to diesels. A Class 33 passes Northam for Southampton Central. Northam was the junction for Southampton Terminus Station and the line to Eastern Docks. Diesel-electric multiple units had control of services to Reading by 1966 or to Alton over the Mid-Hants line. Southampton Terminus would close in the November. A DEMU arrives into the original Southampton station of the London and South Western, opened throughout to Waterloo in 1840. The line into the docks passed Terminus station on its eastern side over Canute Road. The docks can be seen in the distance. Although the dock system had been dieselised in 1962, work remained for the USA tanks, especially when a banana boat arrived. One of the many modifications to the tanks in 1947 for dock service was the provision of steam heating, and this was necessary on the banana van trains. Officially, the dock shed closed in January 1966, but in reality served the tanks to the end of steam, although all of them were nominally allocated to Eastleigh by now. Including departmental locos, there were 10 USA tanks running at the beginning of 1966. The first to be withdrawn was green liveried 30,073 in the December. On the 28th of March 1966, Barry Eagles captured this view of 34064 Fighter Command, absolutely immaculate, diesel fitted and just weeks from withdrawal, backing into the docks for an evening freight to London. 30,073, used on 5 rail tours in 1966, runs back to Eastleigh's shed. As a result of the dieselisation in 1962, 6 USA tanks were withdrawn for transfer to departmental service. 2 were sent to Ashford Wagon Works. 30,070 became DS-238 in August 1963, painted malachite green and named Wainwright in memory of the first locomotive superintendent of the South Eastern and Chatham Railway. 30,065 was similarly treated, becoming DS-237 Mansell. Both were hard at work in 1966, in fact not officially withdrawn until September 1967, 2 months after the end of steam on the South Western. Both are preserved on the Cantonese Sussex Railway. .239, once 31592, a C-Class 060 built in 1902, one of the last 9 to be built at Longhedge Works, also worked well into 1966 at Ashford. And so the story of Southern Steam rolled on into April 1966. The North-South Expresses remained steam throughout the summer timetable. 35023 departs Southampton Central with a pull to Newcastle working. 34088 213 Squadron has lost its nameplates on a down Bournemouth Express in Clapham Cutting, recovering from the 40 miles per hour slack through the junction. 35030 Elder Dempster lines would be the last steam engine into Waterloo on July the 9th, 1967, but still had a long way to go when seen at Clapham a year before. Unrebuilt 34015 Exmouth also had a year to go in April 1966, working an up Bournemouth morning train. What of the next 15 months? Surprises there certainly would be. The first for our next volume will be extensive coverage of Longmore's WD 210 Gordon out and about on the Southern Main Line on rail tour duty in beautiful weather, along with more glorious action from 16 different classes between April and July 1966. Visit the Isle of Wight for the Ventnor closing. Southern shed visits and line-side action, all to continue the definitive story of the end of Southern Steam, right down to the last sunset.